Welcome to Just the Myth. Sometimes you're not in the right headspace to listen to a guy talk about stretching the muscle and tearing the fascia, but you still want to listen to that guy mispronounce mythological names despite his best well-researched efforts. This is for you. On Just the Myth, I'll cast aside the fitness portion of Fitness and Folklore entirely. There's just some myths out there that I love and believe should be shared that don't quite fit in with the nature of mythic muscle. You and I will explore those tales in this series, along with maybe just a tinge of history. Just the Myth's sibling, Just the Fit, is probably more your speed if you're looking for something actionable. Something you can directly apply in the gym for your own edifice. Of course, if you need a bit of both, Mythic Muscle's still there waiting for you. And hey, if you're not interested in the myth and you're just here to support me, you've got a very, very special place in my heart. Thank you. If you want to support me further, you can find me on nearly every social media platform. Patreon, my preferred platform, TikTok, X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, Podbean, Spotify, Patreon, and Instagram by searching for Mythic Muscle Podcast and looking for the helmet crossed with a barbell and the microphone. While Halloween has passed, it's hard to say that spooky season is over. I mean, tell me, do you think witches keep calendars and agendas telling them when to operate? Or do they just simply see the dying trees, the mosaics of leaves resting on their roots and continue their wicked ways? Who's to say? I know that for me, if the wind cuts to the bone and the trees writhe like skeletal arms through moonlit night, I'm certainly feeling some type of magic in the air. Editor, play Phil Collins in the air tonight here? Or Donovan's Season of the Witch, yeah, that fits too. Either way, at this time of year I find myself in my best spirits. Maybe it's the relief of warmth after a frigid day. Perhaps it's the peaceful loneliness of a frost-bit midnight walk. Or just maybe it's that strange song sung through those raspy woods. Baba Yaga's song. That's right, in this episode we'll be covering one of the most classic pieces of folklore that struck itself pretty tangibly in modern media. That strange Slavic fairy tale depicting the old witch of the woods with her moving hut and devilish potions. It should be noted, before we begin, that Baba Yaga's story is not one, but many. Through the few hundred years that her story has been orated or notated, it's been edited, morphed, or changed. So much so that she's less of a single story character and much more akin to a character of Slavic canon. I think that's pretty cool. Baba Yaga shows up as either heroine or villain, or she acts as a neutral force of natural change. In some stories, she's frying children up and eating them, in other tales, she's exposing affairs between married men and women. Baba Yaga does it all. I'll tell one of her more famous stories, and then I'll be putting you, the listener, right into the thick of it. Preamble aside, let's check out some history right quick. Mention of the Baba Yaga is first accredited to polymath Mikhail Vasilyevich Lomonosov in 1755, as part of a larger collection of works regarding Slavic folklore. Lomonosov is a relatively interesting figure himself, lying in order to secure enrollment in the Slavic Greek Latin Academy, studying the matters of the universe, the stories of the Slavic people, and scoring tutelage under prominent German philosopher Christian Wolff. In the book titled Russian Grammar, Lomonosov highlights Baba Yaga, but this is not her inception, as wood carvings dating back to the 17th century depicted the witch in her hut which bore chicken legs, or the vile woman who flew upon a broom or mop. And in one particular wooden block, she rode a pig and fought a crocodile thing. I'm not sure what to make of that one, but it does go pretty hard. Regardless of who writes her or what she's written upon, there's a few things that are in common agreement. A. She's old and enormous in stature. B. She's a witch, shaman, or creature of mystical means. C. She's a trickster of sorts, often opting for chaos over the mundane. D. She does not bend to the whims of society and strikes herself a bit of an outlaw. Because of all of those things, she's often seen as a beacon of feminine independence, or a figure to subvert cultural norms. There's an argument to be made that Baba Yaga is merely a representation of nature, as she can be calm, gentle, and reasonable in one moment, but in the next her capricious nature reveals itself and she stuck some kids in a cauldron. Baba Yaga is both the thundering clouds and the autumn breeze. It's my estimation that the Baba Yaga is closer to an archetype, like the stock characters of Greek theater. She's your Miles Gloriosus, your Cenexiratus, or your Alazone, a sort of staple figure to symbolize change, nature, rebellion, independence, and trickery. It is to suggest that in every woods there lies a Baba Yaga waiting for you should you linger too long. And I think I've lingered in the history a bit too long here, so let's dive into one of Baba Yaga's many tales. The fair Vasilisa, young, naive, and no stranger to cruelty, sat upon her bed, brushing the straw hair of the Motanka doll given to her by her late mother. She hears those words echo in her mind, the ones spoken to her as she took the doll in her hands for the first time. Vasilisa, if you should ever find yourself in trouble or in need of comfort, give this doll just a bit to eat and a bit to drink, and it will help you in anything you desire. As the final symbol of the memory fell, her door slammed open, knocking her porcelain tea set to the floor. She had received it as a gift from her father, a wealthy merchant. Standing in the threshold of the doorway was her stepmother, wicked and cruel in her own right, but only when Vasilisa's father wasn't around. And at that moment, Vasilisa's father was away peddling his wares, which meant that Vasilisa's amnesty from her stepmother's abuse was away as well. She snapped at Vasilisa to get to the housekeeping duties, hand-washing the floorboards, raking the leaves in the front lawn, feeding the livestock, washing the horses, fixing the beds, putting supper on. The list was endless. And far too much for Vasilisa to accomplish alone. Wasn't this the reason why Vasilisa's father had remarried? For someone else to keep the home and raise Vasilisa in his late wife's stead? Vasilisa couldn't linger much on the thought, as if she had, her stepmother's 2 daughters might just march in after their mother, grab Vasilisa by her hair, and throw her into the muck of the stables outside, as punishment for her disobedience. This was Vasilisa's existence, to forever be worked over by her stepmother and her sisters, worked to the bone so that her pseudo-family might keep their appearances in the eyes of Vasilisa's very wealthy father. All the while they indulged in the fruits that come with marrying into wealth. So Vasilisa set to task, but there would be no way for her to complete all the responsibilities set upon her this day. While her stepmother and stepsisters napped the day away, she sauntered off to her room for a moment. She set out a small cup of tea and a sliver of bread for the doll and stroked its straw hair. Surely enough, when Vasilisa walked with her bucket to the stables, she had found the horses already cleaned, and their hooves free of debris. When she went to return the bucket to the well where she had filled it, she noticed the livestock slopping at their already filled troughs. Vasilisa smirked a thin but loving smile to herself. Her mother's doll never failed her, and so her days went, being set to task on Herculean feats and completing them with the aid of the Motanka doll. And eventually she would come to the age where suitors would trap up to the door of the wealthy merchant asking for his daughter's hand in marriage. But it was often that the wealthy merchant was away doing wealthy merchant things, and who should be left to answer the door other than Vasilisa's stepmother? Of course, Vasilisa's stepmother would offer the hands of her 2 daughters, as they were older, and it was customary to wed the older daughters first, except always the pair would be turned down. They weren't nearly as fair as Vasilisa, and the young suitors could see that their outward appearance reflected their inner temperament. Despite locking Vasilisa in her room every time the suitors had come, she would still somehow find her way to the sightline of the young men. Her door magically seemed to unlock itself, much to her stepmother's chagrin. After months of suitors asking for Vasilisa's hand instead of her stepdaughter's, she had decided that enough was enough. Vasilisa's father had kissed his goodbyes to his girls and set out for an extended business trip that would take him far from his manor in the luscious, verdant forests of western Hungary. Of course, the deep mists that permeated that place would extend his travels even longer. It was more than safe to assume he wouldn't be returning for a few days at least. The perfect opportunity for Vasilisa's stepmother to rid her home and stepdaughters of this plague born of her husband's first wife. She sold their home and immediately relocated the family to a shambling mound of a hut, deeper into the dense Hungarian forest. The mist sank lower and thicker. There would be no chance that the suitors would find Vasilisa here. It is rumored that the deepening mists are the result of the steam from Baba Yaga's cauldron boiling over, blanketing the forest floor in humid, sticky fog. It would be more than easy to lose oneself in the forest, and even easier still to accidentally wind up in the grandmother's cauldron. Vasilisa's stepmother doubled down on the responsibilities asked of Vasilisa, and worse yet, she would routinely send her deep into the forest to fetch unnecessary affects. Mushrooms and berries to be used in a stew that would never be made, tree bark and elm roots to be used in medicine that would never be devised. Yet each time, Vasilisa returned, by magic, with the ingredients asked of her, all the while still maintaining her housekeeping duties. Flustered at Vasilisa's resilience against her stepmother's attempts to mar her good looks or to send her to her demise via Baba Yaga, she set Vasilisa to an impossible task. Vasilisa and her stepsisters were to put out all the fires of the house, be those lantern lights, cooking flames, or the bonfire to burn refuse, all the fires except one singular candle. Her stepmother went to bed, and Vasilisa did as she was asked, but when she came upon the last candle, it had been doused. Standing just before it were Vasilisa's stepsisters, who consequently screamed at her and threw her from the home, framing her for putting the candle out, all according to their mother's plan. They told Vasilisa that she must now fetch flame from Baba Yaga's hut so as to relight the candle. Vasilisa attempted to protest, but was faced with the fact that, out here, they were alone, save that eerie, decrepit hut of the old Witch of the Woods. She reached for her doll for help. It simply told her to find the hut, and there Baba Yaga would take care of things. So she set out early in the morning as it was, just before dawn. She began her trek through the winding forest path. After traveling for what felt like only a few minutes, she found herself accompanied by a rider on a white horse. He smiled at her, took her measure, and dawn broke. As it did, he was gone. She continued to walk and found herself once again accompanied by a rider, this time atop a horse of deepest red. They slyly smirked at her, and the noon sun rose high into the sky, fluttering through the forest canopy, and he was gone. She stopped to look for him for a moment, and as she completed scouting the horizon, she found nothing, no trace of the rider or the horse's tracks. And when she turned back to the path, there at the end lay a hut borne atop thin, veiny chicken legs, and walled off by a fence of bone not unlike an ossuary. She swallowed, thought of her doll, and as she went to reach for her bag to retrieve it, her gaze was met by deep, black eyes. Another rider, atop a massive black stallion, stared down at her. No smirk, no smile, just a neutral gaze, imposing and commanding. The stallion trotted past the girl, its tail whipping in the cold breeze. As the rider crossed the threshold of the fence, the eye sockets of the skulls exploded with a green flame. For a moment the fire raged and slowly began to flicker to a mere sickly jade glow. Vasilisa did not want to push forward. She was far too frightened. She wouldn't move, and she wouldn't reach for her doll. This is how Baba Yaga found her. From the same path Vasilisa had just traveled, there came a large flying mortar, twice the height of the girl, and inside of it a decrepit, muscular old woman peered out. Eyes that were both vicious and understanding, a countenance that seemed to shriek and sing simultaneously. She looked upon Vasilisa and inquired, asking why she had willingly arrived at the step of Baba Yaga. Vasilisa told her everything, every detail, for she held brilliance in equal measure to her beauty. Baba Yaga laughed, nodded, and promised her the flame, but only if Vasilisa performed a few minor housekeeping duties. This was Vasilisa's strength, and so of course she rightly accepted. Except these were no minor duties. First, Vasilisa was to clean the house and the yard. Not too difficult, except the house was atop chicken legs, which were sunk into a muddy bog. Next, Vasilisa was to wash the Baba Yaga's laundry. Not too difficult, except it's difficult to wash mud, blood, and the stink of death from centuries-old clothing without ruining them. After the washing, Vasilisa was to cook Baba Yaga a meal to feed a dozen people. This wouldn't be too difficult, but extremely time-consuming, making the other tasks exceptionally more difficult. To cap things off, Baba Yaga would need her potion ingredients sorted. Vasilisa was to separate individual kernels of rotten corn from the clean corn kernels, and from there separate poppy seeds from their place within the murky soil beneath the chicken-legged hut. All this to be done before Baba Yaga returned for the day, and not a second later. So Vasilisa set off, like a whirlwind through the forest, the fallen leaves kicking up behind her everywhere she went. She cooked and cleaned and sorted and washed as fast as she physically could, but the day was growing later and later. Her weariness was taking her, as she hadn't slept since the night before the incident with the candles. As she slumped down at the ossified fence, tears flowing freely from tired eyes, she heard her pack rustle. She opened it and stared into the linen. She stroked her doll's straw hair and set before it berries and a small cup of mushroom tea. It told her that she needn't worry, but she must sleep. As the words hit her ear, she felt slumber sweep her to the depths of dreaming. She awoke to the thundering hooves of the white rider, who looked down upon her with a tremendous smile. The dawn broke, and Vasilisa was stunned. Everything had been completed, the 12 slabs of meat still warm over the cooking fire, the ancient laundry fresh and soft, the corn and poppy seeds neatly separated and flecked, and the yard gleamed as much as a bogyard can glean. As she inspected everything, she heard more hooves, and this time she saw that same rider of red peering at her behind a knowing grin. He rode off and towed the sun with him to its full height. Vasilisa had continued to dust things off throughout the day, just simply going through the motions as it had clearly already been spotless. As the moon began to take into the sky, she had looked out onto the road from above, standing in the threshold of the house. She had anticipated the coming rider, and slowly he trotted along with his gargantuan black stallion. He looked up at her, gave a nod, and slowly sauntered away. With his departure, the sun fell completely still below the horizon, and the moon beams glinted off of the fence bones. Baba Yaga returned and questioned how Vasilisa had gotten all of the work done. Vasilisa thought about retrieving the doll, and as it rustled in her bag, she thought better of it. She replied that all had been completed by her mother's blessing. Baba Yaga sneered and snorted. She threw Vasilisa from the hut and tossed her a lantern crafted from a skull. Even as it landed in the murk waters below the hut, the flame refused to go out. The witch called out to her, telling her to bury the skull once the flames had been used, or else it would send the house entirely aflame. Vasilisa ran back to her home, hoping that she could right the wrong that was dousing the final candle. But when she stepped inside, she saw her step-family frantically attempting to light the cooking fire. She looked to them, where they scorned her. Since she had left, they hadn't been able to light any flame. Every fire would immediately burn out. Then they looked to her and saw the burning coals within the skull lantern. Her stepsisters snatched it from her grip and began to fight over it. The one sister wanted to light a flame for her tea, and the other wanted to assist her mother in the flame for the cookpot. As the two struggled, they failed to notice their skirts had caught ablaze. Vasilisa's stepmother saw the flame and shrieked. She attempted to rip the skull lantern from the girl's hands, and in doing so, her own dress had caught fire. Vasilisa watched in awe as the flames burned the three women, and as their bodies had been reduced to cinders, the burning coals died out. Vasilisa, not too perturbed by the outcome, buried the skull and fled for the closest city. She would eventually become a tailor's assistant, where she would craft the finest regalias in all of Russia, and soon she would catch the attention of the Tsar, who would ask her hand in marriage. That's where Vasilisa the Beautiful's story ends, but Baba Yaga's not done yet. You put your gun and your badge down on your desk. The glass of scotch isn't going to pour itself. You take a swig of the coffee from this morning. It's gone cold from sitting out for 9 hours in an office with no heat. You prefer it that way anyhow. The shivering keeps you lucid, on your toes. This file you've gone over 1 trillion times just never seems to make any sense. The black geese spotted over the trail, the kids disappeared, but the parents always return saying the same thing. It smells like baking spices and smoked meats. Give me a break, you say out loud. The peatiness of the scotch reminds you of the moss you found while out gathering information. You say gathering information, but really you didn't have any idea what to look for. You slap the manila folder back down onto your desk and uncork the bottle for another pour, which you spill all over your desk as your phone's ringtone blares through the quiet space of the lonely office. Shaken a smidge, you answer the phone incredulously. The phone line clicks. You grab the keys to your truck and tear off into the trail. You meet up with one of your range officers. He tells you that this guy's son got torn off the trail by something big, and it was far too fast to get a clear identification. You walk over to the man, the leaves and twigs crunching beneath your boots. You assure him you'll find his kid and that he can warm up in your truck if he needs. Shit, you left your belt on your desk. Walking off trail deep into the woods without so much as a flashlight, let alone your .44, seems like a pretty terrible plan. You give your wife a call. She's got a spare key to your office, and even though she begrudgingly agreed to move into a cabin closer to the office, she still gives you the works for making her come out so late. A quick 5-minute trip, and then another 2 or 3 minutes into the trail is all you ask of her. You'll take the kids out tomorrow so she can have a day to herself. She agrees, and you gather all the information you can about the event, through the open window of your truck and the shivering man inside. You actually recognize this guy. He was the real estate agent who got you your cabin. Great guy, if a little sleazy, but in the real estate trade, sleazy is the typical MO. You tell him, once it's all over, he'll get his kid back, and the two of you can go and knock a few back to blow the steam off. He agrees and takes a solid breath, the first one he's taken since you arrived on the scene. You tell your range officer to check in for the night, as your wife pulls up in the sedan. She hands you the belt and dangles the gun between her index and thumb reticently. She's never liked guns and hates that your job requires one. She locks eyes with the guy in your truck and tells you she'll keep his head on straight while you go figure out what the hell is going on. Can't have him running after you looking for his kid. You kiss her on the cheek and fasten your belt. Your knees buckle a bit on the slope of the trail. You follow that strange scent of baking spices and smoked meats. You see a pretty clear path of carcasses that would indicate the trappings of some large predator. It's hard to tell what those bones are. Maybe deer bones? No, they're too thin to be deer bones and way too large to be a domesticated animal's bones. Something's off here for sure. Your hand finds its way to the revolver's grip. You release the holster's clip and draw it before you, resting the grip of the pistol just over your other hand holding the flashlight. The first round goes wide. You didn't even realize your finger had smoothed the trigger until you heard the hammer slam against the casing. The second goes even wider as you trail the movement with your flashlight. It's just some damn birds. You drop the flashlight, but immediately you put it right back on target. These weren't any birds, they were black geese. Double time, you follow them through all manners of briars, thorns, poison sumac, and the like. There's more important things at stake than a couple of cuts and hives. You look up as the birds take an almost vertical flight pattern over the canopy, but you keep moving forward before you slam into something. It buckles and you hear the rustle of leaves as it hits the ground with a soft thud. You pull the revolver down, locking it onto the origin of the thud. The flashlight blinds you for a moment as the proximity to the light's reflection takes a minute to get adjusted to. You see the sniveling wet face of a young boy no more than 7 years old, flush red and frozen in fright. Immediately, you slam the revolver home in its holster and begin reassuring the boy that everything's alright, that he doesn't need to worry, his father's just around the corner. You're a district ranger of the NFS and he can trust you. You ask the boy if you can pick him up so that he can rest his legs a bit while you run back to your truck. He nods and you press him against your shoulder and chest. He rests his head at the base of your neck. You hear him whisper something and he begins tapping you hard on the shoulder. You spin and draw the gun. 3 rounds, dead on target. The 4th round glances off with the sound of steel ricocheting off of stone. Click. Empty. You holster the gun and run, as the thing in the shadows floating behind you begins to quicken its pace. It breaks the thick branches of the nearby trees and smoothly keeps up with you. You catch the glimpse of some pot thing you don't know, but there's someone inside of it. You're not sticking around to find out who, though. You kick it into high gear, pounding with all of your might up the slope, a stride wide enough to straddle a horse. It's the best you can to keep your footing with the sloping mud and tree branches attempting to pull you back down. You don't hear the woman cackling anymore, as you've seemingly left her in the mist below the trail. And you're certainly not going to slow down for any reason, you thought. But the boy is silent, in shock from the ongoings of the night, surely. But you hit him pretty hard earlier as well. It might be good to check on him. You set him down on his feet, pat his shoulders and head looking for any injuries. He's got a couple of cuts on his face, but nothing too severe. You check in with him, ask him if he's okay. He says nothing but nods gently. You tell him you'll have some hot cocoa ready for him the minute you get back to the office. You call your wife to ask her to turn the heat on in your office and to tell the father that you found the boy. Well, you leave a voicemail saying those things because her phone is off. This would worry you, but you've been to couples therapy, and in those sessions, the therapist did say you should try to be less anxious about your wife's safety, or what she's doing and where she is. But come on, how could you not? It's your job to be hypervigilant. You're basically a detective, for Christ's sakes. You run, just a bit faster than you typically would at this point, not because of whatever the hell was in the woods, but because the therapist's lesson never really completely struck home for you. A few minutes of hard running and you see headlights. You recognize them as your truck. You slow down for a minute. There's a ton of movement inside the cabin. Something's wrong. You put the boy down and pull out your knife. Guns out of bullets, no use there. And you slowly creep up on the truck. As you look inside, you see the real estate agent with his tongue down your wife's throat, and it looks like she's the one calling the shots. They don't notice you for a second, and she begins to undress him. You give a tap on the door and they both look at you like deer in the headlights. Red-handed. The window rolls down. Immediately your wife begins to explain. You put your hand up to stop her. Found your kid, you say to the father. You call him over and the father stammers for a minute. You walk off, back to the office and sit down in the chair. You don't even take the belt off this time before the scotch glass overflows. Maybe it's the drink, but you swear no matter how many times you've sat at this desk, you've never seen that before. There's a very light, almost imperceptible carving in the wood. It looks like a woman, an old woman in a cauldron. No, a kettle. What is that? You look a little closer, and you see an old woman in what looks to be a giant mortar. Baba Yaga, you groan out loud to yourself. Baba Yaga. You put the file back into the desk and lie back in your chair. No reason in going home tonight. Might as well just sleep here. The myth of Baba Yaga is incredibly pervasive through history, and has probably in some form or another found its way into your favorite media. If you like the John Wick movies, you've got good taste, but you also know exactly what I mean. Hell, even Scooby-Doo has covered the Baba Yaga in some aspect. Hopefully this shed a bit more insight for you, and gave you a bit more of an understanding of the origins of the ancient Witch of the Woods archetype. With that, I have been your host, Benjamin Cloud. This has been Just the Myth on the Mythic Muscle Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day, a fantastic lift, and, if it's a rest day, go hug your kids and tell them scary stories of a witch in the woods. Take care, folks. Please consider supporting me on Patreon. For only $3 a month, you get Discord access, and you buy me a protein bar. $5 a month gets you Discord access with special colors and emotes, blooper reels, a shout out from me, and transcripts of each episode. $10 a month gets you all of that noise, a vote in our monthly poll, a personalized 10-second clip of whatever you want me to say, and every dollar spent at that tier goes right back into the podcast so that I might bring you a better listening experience. Follow my socials. You can find me on pretty much every platform by searching for Mythic Muscle Podcast and looking for the helmet crossed with the barbell and the microphone. If you made it this far, you're my favorite type of human. I hope you have a wonderful day, a fantastic lift, or if it's a rest day, you get some quality relaxation time. Thank you.